choice all. This is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This one is a review of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings. I read the full thing. I've only got the book one with me because it's two parts. I'm not going to wave two books around. And I'm only going to look at this one book today. Now, it's going to be a slightly ranty review, this one, I'm afraid, sorry. And I will start off by saying something that's slightly out of context, but it will make sense. Pardon me, I have a bit of a cold. Now, we all know that the TV series Game of Thrones started well and ended badly. Now, the reason for this is generally because people say, the writers ran out of book material, and once they were out of it, they were no good. And that is, I think, at best a half-truth, because some of the best scenes from the first couple of series were written purely for TV. They weren't in the books at all. Arguably my favourite scene from the first series is where Robert and Cersei talk. They're not point-of-view characters in the books, so we wouldn't ever have had this. But we have them talking initially about potential invasion, and it leads to talk about their marriage, and it leads to talk about Lyanna. And there's some brilliant acting, and some brilliant dialogue, and that was all written for the TV show. So it's clear the writers of the TV show really knew what they were doing. They understood the characters and the world and the material. They're capable of writing a well-balanced scene and brilliant dialogue. It's fantastic. So they're obviously good at what they do. And that means it hurts more when we get to Series 7 and it's almost childishly bad. Now, it's not that extreme with this, but it's kind of sad because Brandon Sanderson has written a good book. Unfortunately, it's drowned by a load of stuff that wasn't needed and that slowed it down and that was just frustrating and dull. In this book, there is about a third of it that's really good. And I'm just thinking, well, you're clearly good at writing. Why did you do the other two-thirds that were so bad? And I don't get it. The bits that are good are so very good. But they're just overwhelmed by a lot of stuff that I thought was just completely unnecessary. And it seemed to just be there for the sake of being there, or being there to set up some other books. And yes, you can set up other books in a series in your opening book, but that's not an excuse for that opening book to not be good in and of itself. It should still be interesting and reasonably well paced. Yes, a slow first book is fine. I've done that. Tolkien has done that. But there are limits. Now, there are three sort of protagonists in this book. You have you have Cal, who is a soldier. You have Dalinar, who is a high-level aristocrat, and you have, how do I say, Shallan. I keep wanting to mess up pronunciations. You have Shallan, who is a low-level aristocrat in financial troubles. Now, her story's okay. It's a bit of city life, it's a bit of conspiracy, and towards the end it gets very, very good. We've just had to wade through a lot of fairly slow build-up to get there. Dalinar's story is really, really good. He's the brother of the murdered king, he's the uncle of the current king. The current king's extremely paranoid, his nobles can't be trusted, and Dalinar's a good character. He's trying to do the right thing while being loyal to people who don't necessarily deserve that loyalty. And his ending is unbelievably good. And then we have Cal. If you just cut him out of the story, this would have been a great book. I would say that's a little much because he's obviously being set up as a chosen one for later in the series, so I suppose he's needed to some extent. But if you sliced his chapters by say, have 1/3, maybe 1/4 of what's there, you'd have been fine. Because so much of them were just not needed, and it made it dull to read about him. He might have been interesting if we'd just not been so... drowned is not the right word, suffocated is not the right word, but overwhelmed by just the amount of stuff that he's doing, because it's just the same stuff over and over. Now, a little bit of context. This world, it's high fantasy, and it's a world where light-eyed nobles rule dark-eyed commoners, and there are these mystical blades called shard blades, and if a commoner can somehow get his hands on one, maybe they can become like a light-eyed nobleman, but it's just a bit of a myth to keep the commoners in line. And there's this constant war going on with some people called the Parshendi. And it's a war that our guys could probably win if they were united in purpose and fought to conquer, but they don't. They're not united, they fight to raid and just fall back and raid and fall back, and it's... I know it's supposed to be tedious and pointless, but because there's so much of it, the reading of it also gets to feel tedious and pointless. Now, Dalinar's role in all this is he sees the situation for what it is, and is actively trying to make things better. His plot is interesting. Cal's plot is that he's this low-level grunt bridge man whose job it is to put bridges across chasms and be in the most dangerous situations. And yes, we get it, life is hard for him. But so much of the book is dedicated either to look how terrible life is for Cal and his boys, or look how awesome Cal is. He grew up to be a doctor, and he's morally sound, and he's cleverer than everybody else, and he has magic-y magic on his side, and he's better at fighting than everybody else, and he's better at uniting people than anybody else. And he's not quite... he's not quite the dreaded Mary Sue, because the hallmark of the Mary Sue is that everybody automatically likes and respects him, and that isn't true. But he flirts dangerously close to being one, and is obviously a chosen one, and I don't tend to like chosen one plots. They don't tend to gel well with me. So I didn't have much time for him. I would happily have cut him down to being the third largest of the 3 plot lines and have the main character be Dalinar. But that, to a certain extent, I could argue objectivity, to a certain extent it is personal preference, but we shall see. That is for you to choose. Another little gripe I have is, and it's sort of true of the first Song of Ice and Fire book, but they do at least go into it a bit during there, or a bit more. The prologues, because there's 2 of them, are really sort of what a prologue should be. They're mysterious and they're intriguing and they make you want to know, oh, I wonder what this is all about. But then we have a very long stretch of not really having anything particularly interesting that's connected to it. We have a little bit of the consequences of one of the prologues, but that's it. And that really interesting concept that sort of got me hooked in doesn't start getting explored for quite a while, and even then we're not really going very far with it. And it is another example of why I'm kind of angered by it, because this fellow here is obviously good at writing books, because he's written a really good start, and one of the protagonists is really interesting, and it's just frustrating that all of that good stuff is so overshadowed. And I made a note. Also, he does my real pet peeve of saying people fire arrows. You don't. Arrows are not, unless it's on fire, shooting an arrow is not firing it. You fire something when it's propelled by gunpowder. That's why it's called fire, because you use fire to shoot it. Saying that you fire an arrow is like saying you throw a bullet. It just doesn't work, and it's so irritating. I mean, one of my favourite films in the world is Lord of the Rings, and it still grinds on me when they say fire for that. Again, one can argue objectivity, one can argue personal preference, but that one really got to me. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, I made another note. I'm going to stop ranting about Cal in a second. His sort of big, and now his story begins, his sort of, this is the really inciting moment for him, is a chapter called Stormwall. And I was thinking, by comparison of Lord of the Rings, in Lord of the Rings I would argue that the story really gets going once we reach the Prancing Pony. Because once we're there, we realise Gandalf's not with us, we meet Aragorn, and the hobbits realise this isn't just Gandalf will sort it out, it's no, we have to be out into the wild and our adventure begins in earnest. Now that is, I've noted, chapter 9 in Lord of the Rings, which is generally considered a slow-starting book. Stormwall, which is Cal's real... Yes, he's done some stuff before, much like in Lord of the Rings, we've had the Barrow Downs, but Cal's done stuff before, but Stormwall is where it really picks up and you think, right, his plot is going now, I get where we're heading with this. That is chapter 34. We've just had so much time with him that wasn't needed, that could have been trimmed or cut completely. So many flashbacks to basically just hammer home what a great guy he is and how very morally sound and haunted and intelligent and gifted he is. And I just stopped caring. I just kept going through it thinking, come on, where's Dalinar? Where's Dalinar? Where's the court intrigue? Where's the grander picture of things? Where's this? So that kind of spoiled it for me. I think as a result, I'm probably not going to continue with the Stormlight archive, because I know people will say, oh, it gets better as it goes on, but it was such a struggle to get through this, and so much time was spent thinking, come on, get a bit like Game of Thrones, come on Sansa, get on with it, we want to get back to someone interesting. I don't think... I might be cheating myself of something, I might not, but I have such limited reading time, I don't want to spend it on something that may be this sort of slog. So I gave it either 2 or 3 stars, because the content that is good is very good, but it's just overwhelmed by the content that was slow and dull. So that is my slightly renty review of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Much like Mistborn, it has a really good ending and some really good bits in it, but a lot of padding that just kind of spoiled it for me. So, if you want to try this, by all means try it, but that is my review and my warning. Basically, every time you see a Dalinar chapter, read that and then just skip everything else, and you'll be fine. Alright. I think I've ranted long enough on that subject, so I will leave it there. This is James, aka JP Harker. Well,